Hello, my name is Jessica Villarreal, and my mentor was Dr. Norbert Cordero. My research was titled The Impact of Habitat Fragmentation on Animal Dispersed Trees in an African Biodiversity Hotspot. Fragmentation leads to reduced species abundance and diversity and has fundamental impacts on forest structure. So on the left we have an example of fragmentation, which is the breaking apart of continuous habitat into distinct pieces or islands. And on the right we see just a visual representation of how species abundance and diversity changes as the amount of space gets smaller. So in continuous forests we have a high abundance and diversity, and as we get smaller and smaller, we are losing species abundance and we're losing individual organisms as well. If we look at seed dispersal from a plant perspective, they need to have fruits that attract animals in order to move their seeds. So, for example, we have a primate that is eating an avocado, and we know that they have high fat content, so they're very nutritious, and they also have large seeds. So avocados, for example, need those large animals to be able to take the seeds away from underneath the tree. If the fruit falls right under the tree, there's going to be a high competition for nutrients, water, and sun. So there's less likely that any individual seed is going to survive. Large animals also typically travel long distances, so it helps the trees colonize other areas, and the animals can also transport large volumes of seeds at once, depending on the size of the animal and the size of the seeds. Frugivores are important mobile links for seed dispersal for some of the reasons we already stated, such as their ability to travel long distances and disperse large seeds. In the image below, we can see that in the islands with frugivores, such as birds in this case, they disperse seeds, and this can be for a number of species, such as chilies in this instant. And then we use those chilies to make products such as salsas and things of that nature. In the bottom, we can see this island does not have any of these birds, so there's no seed dispersal. There's a population decline of the chilies, and then we are losing that ecosystem service because of the disappearance of frugivores. The loss of frugivores also has a direct negative effect on seed dispersal. So as the fragment size gets smaller, the first types of animals we're going to lose are megafauna. And these are animals such as elephants, primates, and in Tanzania we have a very large bird called the hornbills. And when we lose these large animals, we're losing dispersal method for large seeded plants. So the loss of those animals has a direct negative effect on the large seeded plants. This data was collected in the Eastern Arc Mountains, which is in Tanzania on the eastern coast of Africa, and this is a biodiversity hotspot, which means that there's a significant number of species that are found here and nowhere else in the world. And this area specifically has lost an estimated 77% of its original forest. This is an example of types of frugivores, and frugivores are animals that feed exclusively or almost exclusively on fruit. We first have volant animals, which are animals that can fly, such as birds and bats, terrestrial animals that live on land, such as primates and rodents, and then we have megafauna, which includes animals such as elephants, rhinos, and in Tanzania we have large birds called hornbills. On the left, we see an example of data from a study that was done in Mexico. This shows species richness as well as the number of individuals found in 1 hectare forest and 100 hectare forest. So we can see that in the 1 hectare forest, there is only about 47 different species, and that almost doubled in the 100 hectare forest. And for a number of individuals, it almost tripled from the 1 hectare to the 100 hectare. And the study found that in general, large fragments have animals such as primates, bats, and large birds, and these types of species were lost in the small fragments. The question that I focused on in this research was, what is the fate of species dispersed by different animal types due to forest fragmentation, and does reduced frugivore abundance lead to decreased seedling abundance due to forest fragmentation? The raw data was collected over 15 years in the East Usambara Mountains in random 20 by 20 meter plots in both fragmented and continuous forests. The data that collected was the species, the diameter, chest height, and the height. And these were then categorized, the tree species were categorized by the frugivores that dispersed their seeds and whether they were adults versus seedlings. And then I compared the seed dispersal methods with species abundance and fragment size. And there were originally 36,000 data points collected, but for this preliminary data, I am only using 10,000 points. This is data that was collected in the same study area that I used, which is the East Usambara Mountains of Tanzania. On the left, we see this graph of species dispersed by animals, and I am interested in seedlings, which is the bar in white that is circled, and they found that recruitment of tree species was more than 3 times greater in continuous forest and large forest fragments than in small forest fragments. And on the right, we can see species not dispersed by animals, and they found that species that are dispersed by wind and gravity, for example, dispersal was unaffected, no matter the size of the fragment. My hypothesis was that tree species whose seeds are dispersed by multiple animal types will be more abundant than species dispersed by unique animal types, for example, just birds, as fragment size decreases. Below is an example of the categories. So we have abiotic, which are seeds dispersed by the wind, mammals, which includes primates and bats, and then birds as its own category. So here we have the results for trees, and we can see that mammal dispersed trees have a negative slope, and this makes sense because trees live for sometimes hundreds of years, so they were probably there before fragmentation happened. So to really understand these results, we need to look at offspring, which would have occurred after fragmentation. So here we have the results for seedlings. So there's very little difference in species abundance for abiotic dispersal because essentially wind is everywhere. So it's not going to, fragment size is not going to affect or restrict dispersal. As far as species dispersed by mammals, which is in orange, while there is a negative trend for seedling density decreasing as fragment size decreases, this relationship was not statistically significant. And then in green, we do see a decrease in density for bird dispersed seeds as fragment size decreases, which is statistically significant. Based on the results of my preliminary data, I have found that small fragments show significant decrease in seedling density, and I attributed this to the loss of large birds such as the hornbills and taracos, which dispense most of the seeds in this area. And I also found that species dispersed by abiotic factors such as wind remain steady no matter their fragment size, and again, this makes sense because wind is not going to be affected by the size of the fragment. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I just want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Cordero, Dr. Valdez, and all the McNealy scholars.